Hi, and welcome to the show. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Today, we welcome back Christie Mulholland, palliative care physician and certified physician development coach. Today's Kevin MD article is Why Every Physician Needs a Sabbatical and How to Take One. Christie, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me back.
All right, so tell us what led you to write about this particular article and then tell us about the article itself.
Well, Kevin, have you been watching The Pit on HBO Max?
I would love to. I've heard only great things about it, but actually don't subscribe to HBO Max.
Oh, well, if you ever do, I highly recommend binging it. But healthcare workers love The Pit. And I think when we watch it, we recognize ourselves in the characters and we feel seen and we recognize the situations that they're dealing with in this emergency department where like all of the societal problems come through the doors of this ER. So when I saw that the beginning of season 2 of The Pit opens up with the main character, Noah Wiley's character, Dr. Robbie, he is there for his last shift before he leaves for a 3-month sabbatical. And I was really excited to see that on The Pit because it tells me something about the cultural conversation that's happening right now among our medical world. And season 1 of The Pit was really a lot about how resilient these doctors were, how they always found a way to take care of their patients, no matter the obstacles. And some of them were even doing that until they broke down, including Dr. Robbie, Noah Wiley's character. He did have a little bit of a breakdown at the end of season 1. So when I saw that he'd made this decision to take some time off, it tells me that this is a conversation that perhaps we're a little more open to.
So, how common is it for practicing physicians to take sabbaticals?
It's pretty rare to think of a physician that actually takes the standard sabbatical, what you think of where, the medical school dean authorizes 3 months or 6 months or a whole year to go away and then just come back to your job. This is something that I think seems to be a standard across academic medicine where there might be a sabbatical policy on paper somewhere, but in practice, it's very rarely authorized and it's rarely used. And actually, there's a survey from the American Journal of Medicine from 2021. They interviewed associate deans at a bunch of medical schools. And I think they talked to 1,000 physician sample, and only 51% of those medical schools had any faculty at all that took a sabbatical. And among the schools that did have faculty taking a sabbatical, the median number was 3 faculty. And who were these physicians? They actually tended to be more senior, white, male, PhD researchers rather than medical doctors doing clinical work. So it's quite rare. And I will say, though, that I do think there are a lot of doctors that find a way to take some time off, perhaps by leaving one job and then waiting a little while until starting the next job. But the actual official sabbatical that's authorized is quite rare.
So, my impression of a sabbatical was that someone would take one in order to do a research project and something like that. From a clinical standpoint, what are some reasons why clinical physicians may take sabbaticals?
Yeah, usually it's something like that. It's to go and do some specialized research in a lab and come back and bring back a product that is of benefit to the medical school. And so the medical school is happy to authorize that. That's the most common reason. I think that some of the personal reasons why physicians might step away or sort of create their own sabbatical are perhaps to consider making some kind of a career pivot. Maybe they're interested in going into private practice, and maybe it's just to take some personal time to attend to family situations at home, an illness, caregiving responsibilities.
In your Kevin MD article, you talk about your own experience requesting a sabbatical. So, tell us about that.
Yeah, so about a year ago, I had reached a point in my career where I was performing well. I was hitting all of my metrics, and at the same time, I was getting a little crispy around the edges, and I felt pretty irritable and disillusioned with some of the circumstances I would see every day at work. And it was to a point where other people around me were starting to notice, and I really felt that I could use a break to just re-energize and recharge. And when I asked for a sabbatical, it wasn't approved. They were kind of like, come back in 10 years when you're a full professor and then we can talk.
Mm.
So
Kind of a snarky comment.
maybe it wasn't made in such a snarky way. That was what I left with. The response was really just, this isn't a thing that's done.
Right.
And that was data for me, but I didn't stop there. I didn't let the conversation end there. And I decided that this was an important thing for me to do. So I continued working to find a way to make it happen for myself.
So what kind of things did you do to try and achieve that sabbatical?
So some things were easy and some things were really hard. There were some big trade-offs that I needed to make. So the first part of that was getting clear on which trade-offs I was willing to make for myself in my own life. And the biggest one was that I actually needed to resign my full-time position in order to step away for 3 months and then come back to the same institution where I now work part-time. And finding the allies at my institution who were willing to make that work with me, and go outside of the box and come up with this arrangement that isn't a standard arrangement that a lot of people have. That required a lot of intentional work and finding some areas of common ground where I could provide value to my employer and an arrangement that everyone could live with.
Now, what does that say about our current medical culture? The fact that you really had to go through a lot of obstacles, and it seems like to me a lot of friction in order for you to get the sabbatical that you wanted. What does that say about our current medical culture and the potential resistance to other clinical physicians who want that same thing?
I think what it says about our culture is something that people aren't going to be surprised by, but there is a mentality that you're all in medicine or you're out and you're not serious about medicine. And I think that it's short-sighted. That's an aspect of it that I would love to see change, because I do think that in the long term, if healthcare is able to find a way to let these high-performing physicians take a break when they need one and then come back, it ends up saving a lot of hassle and a lot of expense of, if that same doctor can't get a sabbatical where they work, they end up leaving and going and working somewhere else. Well, that means that the institution is going to need to recruit somebody new, onboard them, and train them. And we know that that's very expensive.
So if a clinical physician is listening to us today and thinking of maybe taking a sabbatical, a break, leave of absence, what are some things that they need to think about before proceeding?
So I would invite everyone to read the article where there's a detailed breakdown, and I'll give an overview here of the 4 main steps that any physician can take. The first one is your financial planning. You're going to need runway in order to be able to afford this sabbatical. And I argue that that financial planning should start earlier and start well before you need that break. Because when you get to the point where you need it, if you haven't planned for it, then it's not going to happen. So one simple thing that any physician can do if you think you might ever want to take a sabbatical is just open a savings account and give it a name and call it sabbatical fund, and start putting in a little bit at a time. If you're just starting out and you're a junior doctor, maybe you can put in $10 a day. And then as you go, you can accelerate that. So that's step 1, is financial planning for the sabbatical. Step 2, design your sabbatical. Give it some purpose. If you don't have any North Stars, what are your main priorities for your sabbatical, you're going to risk just having a long, anxious vacation where you're waking up every day and questioning, what am I doing? So for my sabbatical, for instance, my 3 North Stars were, number 1 was family. I got married during my sabbatical. I became a dog mom. Took some time in Hawaii. There she is. I wanted to reconnect with nature. I live in New York City, and so I spent a month in the Catskills in a cabin just reconnecting with nature. And my third priority was launching my coaching business. So giving your sabbatical some structure is step 2 of preparing. Step 3, think about your reentry plan. How are you going to go back to working and earning income again? Are you able to go back to your same employer and having those conversations, those negotiations, and finding those allies that are willing to work with you? Or if that's not possible, when are you going to start networking and looking around for your next job? And then the last step 4 of the process is making sure you have a support system. So going rogue and doing a DIY sabbatical, it can be very vulnerable. So you need people who believe in you and want to help you make this happen. Talk to your family. Find other doctors who have taken some time off. If you start asking intentionally, you will find them. If it's not doctors, find other communities of professionals that believe in taking sabbaticals. Mini retirements is another word for sabbaticals. And there's this great podcast called Retire Often, where different guests go on and they talk about their own sabbaticals.
Now, as you reflect on your own sabbatical, it doesn't sound like at your academic institution there was a lot of support, and we talked about the culture of medicine. Tell us about the support system that you had during your own sabbatical journey.
Well, and to talk about my workplace, when it first came up, there really was a lot of friction, like you said. And then as time went on and it became clear to the people that I worked with and my bosses, my supervisors, that I was going to find a way to make the sabbatical happen, it's almost like their position changed on that, and they became more supportive when they saw how important it was to me that I was going to persist. Of course, my family, my husband, we had a lot of conversations. I realized that I had this fear that if I stopped being a doctor, even for a little while, that my own husband would see me differently. He'd only known me as this palliative care doctor who worked at a prestigious institution. And so having lots of conversations with him where I could really feel his belief in me. And he told me that he was more afraid that I would go on being unhappy than he was afraid about me taking a risk in my career. And, the more I got into the planning, the more I shared my experience with other friends and other colleagues in medicine. And I think that when they could hear my own belief in myself, their support only grew.
Should physicians worry if they take some time off from their employment that they eventually may be replaced? As you know, there's a little bit of a business mentality, or not a little bit, but there is a business mentality when it comes to administration. And I think increasingly physicians are viewed as being easily replaceable. Should physicians worry about that if they take extended time off?
It is a worry, and I would not dismiss that worry. It might be one of the very difficult trade-offs that physicians need to make when they make this choice. On the other hand, if you work somewhere that considers you to be easily replaceable, then what does that say about that environment for you to work there for your whole career? It's a big world out there. We need doctors, and we are facing doctor shortages in the future as practicing healthcare in the US continues to get more complicated and dysfunctional. So I would say, interrogate that fear that you're easily replaced and you'll never find a job again. In coaching, there's this great concept called a limiting belief. And a limiting belief it's a false belief, and it's often a negative belief. And it can hold us back from pursuing something that we want or taking a risk or reaching our full potential. And limiting beliefs, they often come from past experiences we've had or stories that we've been told. Maybe a story that was told to us as a small child by our parent that we just never outgrew. Or I think a lot of limiting beliefs are ingrained in us in our medical training. But some of examples of these things, I'm going to destroy my career if I take a sabbatical. I can't afford a sabbatical. And because we hold these beliefs so close to our hearts, we can't always interrogate them alone. And this is where working with a coach or a mentor or a therapist, having that outside point of view to ask you revealing questions about the stories that you're telling yourself, and to see if you can develop the insight about what is true in your life and what is a story you're telling yourself that limits you unnecessarily.
Now, as you again reflect on your own sabbatical journey, is there anything that you would have done differently if you had to do it again?
Kevin, I really wish that I would have done it sooner.
Hmm.
And I wish that I would have done it before I was getting crispy or irritable, because I would have been able to have hard conversations at work much more gracefully. And, I would have been able to speak about taking a break as something that would be really positive for me, rather than the way that it played out was a little more of like I felt badly, things weren't great with my current situation, and I needed a way out for a little while. So I wish that I would have had more foresight to start planning it in a more intentional way sooner.
We're talking to Christie Mulholland, palliative care physician and physician development coach. Today's Kevin MD article is Why Every Physician Needs a Sabbatical and How to Take One. Christie, as always, will end with take-home messages they want to leave with the Kevin MD audience.
So if you're out there and you're even thinking about taking a sabbatical, but you're worried that it's just not possible, I challenge you to do a lot of reflection. Are you limiting yourself and holding yourself back? Sabbaticals currently, they don't exist as a standard in practice in the medical system. And I hope that will change someday. But in the meantime, you have more power than you think to start intentionally planning your own sabbatical, because you don't need someone else's permission to take care of yourself.
Christie, as always, thank you so much for sharing your story, time, and insight. Thanks again for coming back on the show.
Thanks. It was a pleasure being here.